Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming out on this chilly and snowy February morning here. My name is John Robert Sibyl. I'm the president of AAUW, one of the co-sponsors of the Great Decision Series. And we're about to kick off our final event of the series here. We're going to actually watch a video that is from the Great Decision Series. It's about 25 minutes, and I really think that it really frames the climate issue, sort of how it's become a really big part of the Great Decision Series over time. This particular video comes in as kind of the second part of the lecture series, so I'll talk about that a little bit. We did see the first article in the first part of the lecture series several weeks ago, but anyway, after the video, we'll kind of do some discussion questions and follow-ups. I'll talk briefly a little bit more about myself and AAUW, but I'm going to turn things over here to the video for a little bit. So anyway, enjoy.
Taking gas and society as the pinnacle of world power. It is a solemn moment for the American democracy. For climate change in power is also joined an awe-inspiring accountability to the youth.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Great Decisions Masterclass. In week one, we looked at the thorny geopolitical challenge of Middle East realignment. Today, we consider a very different topic, climate technology. If you think about all of the topics that have populated Great Decisions over the decades, they generally fall into three categories. There are the perennial challenges that we look at almost every year, the routine foreign policy challenges, and then finally the topics that might be considered outliers, only occasionally making their way into the handbook. I gave my first Great Decisions lecture in 1987. Back then, the perennial challenge was the Soviet Union. It was a topic in and of itself each and every year, and it also influenced most all of the other topics considered. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War, that topic went away, and today it's been replaced by China. Trade policy is more of a routine Great Decision. We consider it every 4 or 5 years. It doesn't change as quickly as relations would with the old Soviet Union or today's China. A few years ago, we looked at outer space. First time it had ever been a Great Decisions topic. It was an outlier. We may or may not consider outer space in future lectures. Climate change early on appeared to be an outlier. It was considered decades ago, and then a great deal of time passed before we returned to it. But of late, climate change and climate-related topics have been annual considerations in the Great Decision Series. It is becoming a routine foreign policy challenge. Today, we'll take 3 main considerations about climate technology and competition before considering U.S. foreign policy options. We'll look at the concepts and the consequences of climate change, climate nationalism, and then finally we'll struggle with the question, should we act alone or work with others in addressing ecological challenges and climate change? We begin with the concepts. Early on, and by that I mean the 1990s, most of the focus was on the concept of global warming. This was somewhat problematic because climate change isn't just about the planet getting warmer, it's about disruptions in the normal patterns of weather behavior. Therefore, we shifted from global warming to climate change. Climate change has become a highly politicized issue. One political party has historically denied it, the other has argued it is among the most pressing of issues confronting humanity. So today we often use the concept of extreme weather. All of it, of course, produced by climate change, but nonetheless, it's an issue that we can all get our arms around, understand. Oftentimes we feel it ourselves in our neighborhoods, and therefore that becomes a more useful concept for the debate. Whatever we call it, the planet is getting warmer. The empirical data is clear. Year after year, the temperatures tend to go up. You'll see from this graph that 2023 was the third highest on record in Central Texas, but that also reflects the global pattern as well. And most of the hottest years on record have occurred in the past decade. Climate change has enormous implications for us individually, as a nation state, and a global community. The medical and physical health of people is affected. Community health, of course, is affected as well, not to mention the global instability that can result from massive changes in weather patterns. The Pentagon is taking this issue very seriously. Under successive administrations, it is preparing for the reality that some regions of the world will become unstable as a result of changing weather. Take a look at Syria as an example. This is a country that's fallen into a more than decades-long civil war that has devastated society. You might recall from my previous lecture, Syria is in one of those weakened state categories. And that's a result in part of climate change, because it all began with a series of droughts. Droughts that forced farmers off the land into the cities. They protested against the government. The dictatorial regime did not take that lightly. It responded, and before you know it, we had a civil war unfolding in the country.
What began as a series of peaceful protests against the repressive regime of Bashar al-Assad has turned into a brutal civil war. Over 100,000 people have been killed. Millions have fled the country.
Much weakened is the state of Syria as a result, opening the door for the Islamic State to enter and create havoc. This shows us that climate change locally and internationally can have very significant implications for world order and international politics. The concept of climate technology, what we mean is those technologies that accelerate our efforts to decarbonize the world. We would like to reduce the amount of carbonization, and therefore technologies are required, the aim being a net zero. The problem is that these technologies are incredibly difficult to discover and to adapt to our many needs in industry and modern life. And as a result of that, most companies that contribute to the carbon problem don't have access to them. As a result, government assistance is likely necessary. This creates a real dilemma for those of us in the capitalist world, because government involvement in industry development runs counter to the basic principles of supply and demand, market principles in capitalism. No doubt, the fastest way to get to a global net zero would be if universities around the world, research institutions, corporations, all others investigating climate change and efforts to mitigate it could cooperate with one another, share their findings and research, their ideas. All of the things that they do professionally would be much accelerated if they could work together seamlessly. The problem that we have in world politics is that the global system is divided into sovereign nation states, and where national boundaries cross, oftentimes the lines of communication will be diminished. Countries are concerned about losing their competitive edge if they allow their technologies and their discoveries to escape their national boundaries. To share or not to share is the question. If we share our technological breakthroughs, that, as noted earlier, is probably the fastest path to net zero, but it also holds with it the possibility that other countries and their corporations will gain an economic benefit over us. These technological discoveries are incredibly important on so many different levels, well beyond climate change battles. They're also very important for commercialization, for profit making, for discovery of new products, and for cornering the market. And as a result, nations are very reluctant to allow other countries and their companies to have the secrets that we have discovered. Next, we look at the concept of climate nationalism, a relatively new concept in world affairs. What we know for absolute certainty is that the climate is changing. There's an overwhelming belief that it's being caused by human behavior, but putting that aside, let's just acknowledge that the climate is changing and it is creating problems that are multinational. And anytime you have a problem that crosses international boundaries, very likely it cannot be solved within one country. The solutions that we seek are going to be found globally, whether through cooperation in technological investigation or through some sort of a regulation in the form of an international agreement. But nations are sovereign, and as sovereign nations, they think differently than the world as a whole. It means that they're going to be relatively narrow-minded. What is important to us? How is climate change affecting us directly? And what are the near-term concerns that we should be interested in? Nation states oftentimes prioritize their short-term interests over the long-term interests of a region or the international system. This is particularly the case in democracies, where elections are held every 2, 4, or 5 years. It's very hard to run for re-election promising to fix the world over the long haul. Most citizens, most voters, want to hear what you've done lately and what you can do in the near future. Therefore, nation states are very protective of their technologies, of their discoveries, and of the things that the world might need to know about if we were to collectively combat climate change. Competition is fierce, of course. Where there's technology and discovery, there may be the solution to our climate change challenge. We may be able to resolve the problems we're experiencing someday with the application of scientific investigation, new technologies, and new ways of mitigating the implications of climate change. I've long given up hope that the international community will fundamentally change its day-to-day behavior. We're still going to drive automobiles. We'll still have industry. We'll do the sorts of things that put CO2 into the air. But if we are able to capitalize on our intellectual capital, if we're able to use our scientific discoveries to mitigate those problems, or perhaps even resolve them at the core, that would be a tremendous breakthrough in world politics. Those technologies also give us economic advantage because they are useful in many different industries. And of course, those technologies also have a military application. Most of the commercial applications of technology began in the military domain. Investigation for weaponry, such as lasers, that made very quick application in the commercial fields. Climate nationalism, therefore, is a very real thing in world politics. Green initiatives directed by governments for the benefit of its citizens and its corporations. In other words, assisting your own nationals as opposed to assisting people from other countries, excluding them at the expense, perhaps, of speeding our path towards net zero. Two examples here in the United States of climate nationalism are the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Both of these are Biden administration policies. Together, they're directing about $800 billion in federal tax collected money to support climate change technologies. And they're doing it on both sides of the divide, providing economic assistance to corporations to develop, for example, more efficient solar panels, but also providing on the demand side customer incentives like tax credits to buy those solar panels or electric vehicles, or almost any other sort of climate technology product. Incentives are limited to nationals. And what that immediately gives rise to is a protest from other nations that this is not only unfair, but it also violates existing free trade agreements. Since 1945, the United States has led the global liberalization of the economy. And I use the word liberal in an economic term, as in Adam Smith, in that we're pursuing a market-based economic policy reflective of capitalist principles, a reduced government role in the economy and global free trade with minimal restrictions on access to foreign markets. When our government tells its citizens and its companies, here are resources and assistance to you that we're not going to allow to others, that can very easily be construed as a violation of those various international agreements. The Europeans cried foul immediately. This is fundamentally unfair, they said, as well as illegal. We get the fact that you're fighting climate change, you're addressing issues that are near and dear to our hearts as well, but the fact of the matter is, our companies are going to suffer. We don't have the same chance of selling our products in the American market because you're underwriting the American supply and demand side of the economic calculation. Should we do this alone? Is it best for us to act in a unilateral fashion, or when we do discover things, technologies and science that would be applicable to the world, should we share them? Should we work with other countries? The theories that we have used over the course of the last couple of decades give us some direction on whether or not we should work with or against other countries. According to classic liberal thinking, this is Wilsonian internationalism, which believes that individuals are inherently good, that cooperation in world politics is possible, that peace should be considered the norm. Anytime there's conflict in the world, then there should be a resolution to it. And that resolution is dialogue, diplomacy, and international laws that clarify what we are allowed and not allowed to do. When liberals think about trade policy, they want to work in a multilateral fashion. And this, of course, applies to climate technologies, because multilateralism drives a consensus. If other countries are working with us, then they're going to have more buy-in to some sort of a global regulation that will allow a very smooth move in the direction of net zero. Conferences can be held where the issue is debated, populated by representatives of nation states, as well as scientific experts. They can establish goals for the international community, common across nation states, and then provide a legal framework around which we all will work, so that it is clear what is allowable and not allowable, and a clear plan of action for moving forward. This is a classic liberal approach to a very basic question: should we work alone or work with other countries? Realists, from the classic realpolitik approach, they view world politics in a very different way. To them, the world is highly competitive. Nation states are selfish and egotistical. To them, war is the normal state of affairs. It's not that realists want war to happen, they simply expect it to happen. They believe it is ingrained in our human nature and embedded in the way world politics works, especially if the international system is divided into sovereign, independent nation states. To them, unilateralism is the way to go for all trade policies, for most relations with other countries, and certainly with valuable understandings relating to science and climate technology. The realists will argue that you're only safe as a nation if you are sufficient, if you don't need other countries to provide your security or the basic resources for your economy. Unlike the liberals, who believe there's a positive sum relationship in world politics, meaning that every nation can win at the same time, the realists believe in zero-sum games. If we win, it is at the expense of another country, and if they win, by definition, we have just lost. So these technologies are incredibly valuable. We don't want to share them with other countries, and we certainly don't want to sacrifice our sovereignty for the betterment of a global system that really is broken down into sovereign, selfish, war-prone nation states. And then finally, we have the more recent popular rise of the America First argument in foreign policy. They also argue in favor of unilateralism, but for a different reason. They want to protect American jobs. They feel that a series of international trade agreements, some of them regional like NAFTA, many of them international, have undermined American competitiveness. And they argue this for two reasons. Number one, labor abroad is much less expensive than here in the United States. That creates an unfair advantage. And number two, other countries, their governments, are supporting their domestic industry in violation of free trade agreements. So the United States really must begin to do the same thing. Close off this border to international trade, pump money into American industry, bring back the heartland, and revive the Rust Belt. Foreign policy options. Well, our calculation on climate change and its mitigation is going to include factors such as, will those two countries participate? Yes, we can make changes to our lifestyle. We can invest in climate technology. Will China and India do the same? They're among the biggest emitters of CO2. Shouldn't they be chipping in to help with the scientific investigation and also changing the way that they do business? How much is it ultimately going to cost? And can we even afford this sort of an investment? The national debt numbers in 2023 are just shocking. $1.7 trillion added to our national debt in 1 year's time. Can the issue even be resolved? Is it possible to find a scientific breakthrough in time to save the world from the climate change trend line? And then there's the thorny issue of domestic politics, where we simply don't have a national consensus on what to do about climate change and whether or not the government should be in the business of supporting companies and scientists as well as consumers in moving forward in a clean energy environment. America is deeply divided. You got the optimists who believe we can do this, as well as the deniers who say we're not responsible for climate change, it's just natural that the weather patterns will alter. You got the pragmatists who say, look, even if we could do it without the rest of the world, and especially the others, India, China, and Russia on board, would it really matter? And then finally, there are the nationalists who say, I'm okay with investing, but it has to stay in the United States, benefit Americans and American corporations. If you look at the global emissions of CO2, the United States, China, Russia, India, Japan, very close to the top. We would need all of them on board at a minimum in order to collectively and multilaterally resolve the climate change challenge. There is, however, a new way of looking at competition, as opposed to always thinking that it's a zero-sum game. History tells us that may actually not be the case. So there is indeed a great deal of competition between the US and China relating to technologies addressing the climate. The standard way of looking at this is that it's a zero-sum game. Either we or China will win. But the Cold War tells us that in reality, we both may win if we work together. During the Cold War struggle, which was much more intense, more ideologically driven, more conflictual than the US-China relationship today, that competition produced a lot of positive things for the world. The race to the moon and all the scientific discovery related to it. Civilian nuclear energy was part of that competition, as well as efforts by both sides to pull people out of poverty and to make their lives better so that we could show we are better than the communist Soviet Union. So competition may actually be a very good thing, and perhaps we should allow other countries to join us in the search for climate change technologies. Rivalries oftentimes spur benefits. China and the US is no exception, because this is a different struggle. This is not a struggle about ideology. It's a struggle about role models. Which do you view as a more appropriate ally, the United States or the People's Republic of China? Countries all over the world are asking that question. Because the US is doing such a better job than China, along with the Europeans, in pursuing clean energy, the Chinese know full well that this puts them at the risk of being viewed as the global villain, the major violator, because countries around the world are deeply concerned about the implications of climate change. Take a region like Oceania, way out in the Pacific, where you have a host of very small island nations that are voting members of the United Nations. Long American allies, there is an intense competition with China right now over loyalties in this region. You have Nauru, Tuvalu, Palau, Micronesia, Tonga, all of these countries are being wooed by Beijing, but at the same time, they're very, very worried about rising sea levels. Because as island nations, this is an existential threat to them. They view the Americans more favorably than they do China. That gives us an advantage. And it's not just Oceania. All over the world, there are nations very worried about climate change. And therefore, if the United States viewed climate technologies in a positive fashion, this gives us the opportunity to put a better foot forward to all of those countries whose loyalties we want. It gives us a geopolitical advantage in the world. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Until next time, stay engaged and make great decisions.
So we are going to switch over to the discussion part of this. The topic is climate technology. I want to talk about myself briefly, just so I'm not masking as some sort of expert on this particular topic. So if you want to move to the next slide. My name is John Robert Zibel. I'm one of the co-founders of BG Independent News with Jan and David. I currently teach at BGSU, although I teach on topics like infant and child development, toddler development, early childhood trauma, and some of those kind of topics. It's not really going to tie into this a lot. So as the discussion unfolds, I would like it to be amongst you. I am currently the president, like I mentioned, of AAUW, which is one of the sponsors of this event. I also published some strange books that I'm not going to talk about a lot. So anyway, this is kind of who I am, but I would like to kind of move on and talk a little bit about some of these topics that came up in here. So we'll go ahead and start with the first one, and I will read it, and then if anybody would like to put anything out there, feel free, raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone around. I think it's kind of how we've done this in the past. The transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to an economy based on renewable energy sources is likely to have some devastating impacts on certain population groups, long tied to their familial pasts in those industries. So what role should national and state governments play in helping to smooth out that transition for those adversely affected by this transition? What does everybody think about what we should do to kind of mitigate this transition for especially people like coal miners and things like that? We have a
I think we should really help all these blacksmiths that are out of jobs now and help them to learn how to make tires, because that's where the economy is going, more toward cars and horses. So I think basically the same thing should happen for coal miners and oil rig operators. We should help them to transition to whatever field they want to go into, but more toward clean energy.
Well, thank you. Other thoughts on this particular topic? Back here.
I think the problem with disinformation put out by politicians. I use the example of windmills. My family in another area was involved in the windmill controversy, and the anti-windmill people were putting out, well, if the blades fall down, they're gonna be rolling down the road and wipe out several houses. It really cause cancer. I think that's one of the biggest problems we face in the US is our politicians give out two different aspects of a story and a lot of misinformation. Along with news channels, but, okay?
Cool, thank you very much.
Could you repeat that a little for the people on Zoom?
Yeah, so the comment was on misinformation coming from politicians or even family members, kind of related specifically to windmills. You know, things like windmills causing cancer, windmill blades falling off and rolling down the road and leveling houses and things like that. So just kind of dealing with misinformation we hear from various news sources and things like that can be very challenging. We had, we'll come to you next. We have a comment back here.
Hey, I'll talk. I can talk long enough. You know, it's interesting to me. It depends. The really helping giving group is going to be more of a political decision, regardless. Because that's where it's going to be worked out is in the political realm. What's fascinating to me is how we've become the #1. You're talking about the oil and gas industry. It's not hurting the United States. In fact, we're the largest producer of oil and gas in the world now. We've gone around Russia, we've gone around Saudi Arabia, and actually, as we're building things out, that area is growing in the United States, which is kind of an interesting dichotomy. But really, I think it's more of a political issue about how you're going to help again with constituency.
Well, thank you. And for those of you on Zoom who couldn't hear that, the comment was about how this is an issue that will probably always be a political issue as we're kind of figuring out how to make some of these changes. And I think that was kind of the just this microphone working here. Oh, yeah, right down here.
I'm not sure. I was just thinking that the new technology, 11 last month, the new technology is not perfect. We saw this winter with electric cars running out of juice too early. They could not be recharged. They stopped working and it took forever to charge them. However, we need to look to the future and not keep doing the same things that we've been doing in the past that caused where we are right now. And so, no, they're not perfect. And yes, it takes a lot of land to put solar panels. And it kills birds to have those windmills. But until we figure out some other solution, we have to go forward with the ones we have and stop making things worse. Unfortunately, like it was mentioned, there are still people who think, oh, no, these things are normal, we're fine. Well, we're not fine. Like it was mentioned, a lot of islands in the South Pacific have already asked New Zealand and Australia if they can come to their country because they are losing land every day. It is very real for some people. We are a big country here. We can always go elsewhere within the country, but that's not the same for everybody.
Thank you very much.
There's also recently a big push to fund infrastructure such as roads and bridges by not taxing gasoline, but by taxing mileage used by hybrid and all electric cars.
Yeah, I have an electric car, and it is like $200-300 to renew like license plate tags and things like that, and they definitely get you there. And, you know, I always think this will be, I try to not talk a lot during this section, but I always think when I plug my car in, we generate that power at a coal plant in Illinois, you know, it takes like 5 hours to get here, that pollution. So until we replace some of that infrastructure, we're creating or putting our pollution in somebody else's neighborhood that's not ours. So any other comments on things that we've been talking about or this particular question up here? I think we have a little bit of a chord here.
Thank you for bringing up the fact I am confounded that people do not understand electric comes from someplace polluting. Coal-fired plants, then there's solar panels, which require heavy industry, which is also polluting. We all see these things as a panacea, but look at their origins. It's just not the panacea we hope for.
Thank you very much. I think I saw a hand up over here. Let me see how far we can stretch this.
I think I can project.
Okay, yeah, cool.
Is anything going on to develop for individual homes to make them more climate ready? I mean, I'm thinking back, looking at how in the past, take the Amish, for example, they were very self-sufficient. Is there anything going on to encourage homeowners to do something in their home to help the climate?
Any thoughts on this? So for those of you on Zoom that maybe couldn't hear that, the question was if there was anything going on to help individuals and homeowners to kind of alleviate the climate issue. I think we had a response back here.
There are tax incentives for insulating your homes better, putting in better windows, and I don't know how aware people are of that, but that is helpful. And also, I would mention that the petroleum industry is highly subsidized by the government. People don't realize that. It's kind of hidden in different parts of the legislation. And they've got an advantage there. But a pragmatic approach might be to just bribe them, because they consider every barrel of oil, every ton of coal as unrealized profit. And they think that that belongs to them. And you're not going to convince them otherwise unless you pay them off. Let these people go into the solar energy, tidal energy, wind energy, and they'll probably do a pretty darn good job if they have the profit incentive.
Oh, cool, thank you. For those of you on Zoom, the comment involved the government subsidies that are into the petroleum industry and sort of shifting those, driving the government for solar, wind, and that kind of stuff. But thank you.
Government incentives, tax incentives.
And oh yes, and government tax incentives for housing, sealing windows, making more energy efficient homes and things like that. Thank you very much for that comment. Other comments, thoughts? Yes, I think I have enough here to get to you.
The original question asked about the transition cost of labor moving from one industry to the next. The whole concept of markets written by Adam Smith really didn't pay attention to transitions. We had pin factories. So you had people moving from unskilled labor to unskilled or semi-skilled. Today, the world is not that way. So if we're going to really think in terms of a big, broad issue, government has a responsibility to ease that transition worker. And that's a difficult issue. Someone 50 years old that's been doing X isn't going to learn a new technology in their next 15 years before retirement. It's an issue that the issue is a conceptual issue of how transitions take place from one workplace to another.
Thank you. Other thoughts on this particular question up here related to, how we can, or, what the responsibility is to bridge this gap between industries?
Well, as a society, overall issues are changing that we're going back to the original question about populations that are affected. Something as simple as phones and the transferability of numbers wherever you go, how often you change. The idea that we can now transfer medical benefits. The transferable part of our society is growing, not tying people as desperately to one spot. It is easier in terms of lifespan issues to move them. This has been a gradual thing, but I think it's real.
Thank you. Meet you halfway here.
I guess that's the problem I have sometimes. We don't pilot anything. When I was in a corporation, we would pilot something, try it out before, but sometimes we go full blast on something. Electric vehicles. Ford loses $36,000 on each electric vehicle right now. And they were pushed, GM and Ford were pushed in that. They did a contract. The head of Ford, Mr. Jim Farley, is saying, we're going to move everything to Mexico now because we can't afford these 40% raises we got. We're losing $36,000 on the vehicle. Let's move it to Mexico and make it there. Canadian cars, are not poorly made, but a lot of the Mexican cars, like the Mustang EV coming out of Mexico, are not very well made. So I just like to see a pilot once in a while rather than go full blast on something.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
There has been a pilot plant close by. These windmills out here were a test. And the powers that be decided, yeah, let's go and put some up. And it was estimated that it would take 20 years to pay them off. They paid them off in a little over 10 years.
Yeah.
And they found out that there is sufficient wind. There's enough out there to power 10,000 homes. There should be dozens of them. And, I look at it at one of those things and, I don't know, they've got a function and the form has to follow the function. They may not be the prettiest. See what the future is going to be if people can't even breathe the air, or if it's too hot to live. This is a problem.
Cool, thank you. And for those of you on Zoom, the comment was kind of about how we do have windmills as kind of a pilot program here, and that they have proved to be fairly cost effective and generate more than enough electricity. So thank you. I think I saw a hand up back here.
Yeah, I just saw an article not too long ago that Bill Gates was saying the incredible amount of energy this AI will create. And it was an extremely high amount of energy that there's going to be new needs for electrical systems. It seems kind of logical that with the solar energy and the wind energy and the nuclear energy, that might be the way to go as we decarbonize.
Cool, thank you. And so for those of you on Zoom, the comment was on AI and some comments from, you said Bill Gates focused on how much energy AI could potentially generate. I don't know much about that. Was it more like theorized like technologies that AI would develop? Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, let's move on. So we do have the next question, which actually does get into nuclear power. Nice segue. Nuclear power is seen as a carbon-free energy source, although critics point to adverse climate impacts resulting from development and transport of nuclear energy resources. What do you see as the optimum role for domestic nuclear power in a transition to a net zero economy? Thoughts on nuclear power?
My comment on this is, fear and terror. But also I do know that the Gates Foundation is pouring lots and lots of money, into looking at nuclear possibilities, including, heavily subsidizing, education. One of our Bowling Green graduates I know has, is part of that program, and, man, he's going to get his PhD, he may have it now, in physics directly, related to this. And has had a wonderful ride all the way through. But I'm saying there are, people like Gates that are looking at it. They aren't pushing it. They are looking at it. How to make it safe, how to make it work. It's not a big drive, but at least we haven't dropped it as a possibility.
Well, thank you. Other thoughts on nuclear energy?
France is 65 to 70% of their electricity generated is through nuclear energy. So it's been over there for quite some time. This is a very ugly looking picture of, but the plants are now much smaller. They don't have to be these huge things, and the technology has come quite a way. It is probably something we should consider, in my opinion, as another avenue to explore. I'm not saying everything, but another avenue to explore.
Thank you. And I actually did think it was kind of ugly picture. It was one of the design recommendations from PowerPoint. It's out of settings, so that's where the picture came from. Exactly, yeah. Any other thoughts on this topic of nuclear energy? Okay, we can go ahead and move to the next question up here. So what do you think? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the ability to maintain growth, so economic growth, industrial growth, while converting to a net zero carbon emissions economy? This question comes up, especially in developing countries and things like that. So what are your thoughts on this?
I'm actually more concerned about methane emissions from petroleum plants that make gasoline out of oil than I am about carbon dioxide emissions from automobiles, because methane is 17 times more of greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Thank you. So probably more pessimistic side. I'm more optimistic. Well, thank you.
I was just reading the question and I was thinking, okay, I'm 71 years old. I will probably be gone before things get really, really bad, but I feel for my grandchildren. I am pessimistic. I don't know that countries, like we talked about the competition between countries, and you know, if we get it first, we're not sharing and we'll do better than you will and we don't care. I have to say I'm pessimistic.
Optimistic versus pessimistic.
You can show of hands. Oh yeah, show of hands. Let's do optimistic first, just kind of a. How about my pessimistic folks? It's a pretty evenly divided room, I think, with our optimists and pessimists. Oh, yeah. I think I can reach you here with this cord.
I voted that I would be optimistic, but I think that the whole central issue is we keep saying the government should, the government should. Look at our government. Okay. Okay, everybody laughs, but you know what? It's not a joke anymore. Okay, we got a bunch of people like us that are over 70, 80 years old running our country. And they have no idea what's coming. If we pass a law that you can't be in Congress or be elected a president unless you're under 70 years old, we would make major progress. We really would. I don't know why we, the people, don't do something about it with our votes. So I think it's all dependent upon leadership. We don't have any. I can't resist. We have Gates there. We have J.D. Vance there. Our young lawyers are a rather pathetic, destructive lot. So it's not age, it's character. It's values.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can be optimistic when whatever happens is totally dependent on who gets elected every 4 years. There's no consistency to our policies, and the rest of the world realizes that everything that happens in the United States depends on who gets elected.
I was on the optimistic side, but I would go away from the political part of it. I'm thinking more, if you look at in the past 100 years, how much we've advanced technology. I mean, it's amazing, you know, since the 1920s that we have advanced so much. So I feel optimistic that we can handle this problem.
Thank you.
Going back to the politics, and take this with a grain of salt, I don't vote here, I'm Canadian. But what I've noticed is that this country needs very much a third and a fourth party that are invited to the table. The main problem we have is that there are two parties that don't invite the other parties to participate. And so if you have only two choices, the country will remain polarized. Debates shouldn't be about who can get the most money to fund them. It should be everybody should have equal time. And then we would hear about the platforms of the other parties, and maybe people would vote for the other parties. But now we're at a point that if you don't vote for one of the two, you feel like your vote is lost. And it shouldn't be. We need a strong third party and fourth parties here more than anything else.
Any comments on going with that or anything? Yeah.
Just one more thing. I've got a solution. Let's have a dictator. They get stuff done.
It might happen.
I know, I'm scared as hell of it.
I know.
Because that would solve all the problems. We wouldn't have all this bickering going on in Congress, because there wouldn't be any time. Or if there was, it would just be, you know, a showpiece thing. But this idea that one lady expressed is the problem is if we have elections. That's all.
Thank you. Other thoughts on, and then, you know, as far as like the multi-party, my background is early childhood stuff. Child development, brain development. I do think our constitution calls for a two-party system. So I think we would have to change significantly the structure of our government to get to that, but that, I might be totally wrong about that.
You don't have to come, but just, we have an individual responsibility too, and we forget that. And there's things we can do in our neighborhood. I look at the recycling everything, less than 50% of my block participate in recycling. Okay, I'm sure there's people there that have stuff to recycle, but we have individual responsibility. You know, if we could go out, I go down in the neighborhood, you find a hand grab and pick up drag and stuff. There's things we can do too as individuals. It's not just the government. It's not just the state. It's things we can do as individuals.
Thank you. Other thoughts on optimism, pessimism, kind of related to net zero carbon emission economy. From my perspective, and we'll move on after this to the last question. During COVID, when we saw the impact of having some industries shut down, we saw the ozone very quickly repair itself, and that gave me hope because it repaired itself, from what I understand, a little quicker than they thought it really could. And to me, that gave me hope that we could make some changes that could really have some substantial impact more quickly than we thought. So,
like another epidemic.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we'll move on to the last question here. Nationalism and protectionism appear to be on the increase across a number of countries in the world. How do you see free trade and America First nationalism interests evolving during the early energy transition years? This will be the last discussion question for the day.
I can agree with America First, but then I think we should also be considering the second and the third and the fourth others. We shouldn't just be thinking of America only. We should just be thinking of America First and then sharing our technologies with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Other thoughts on, I read recently that we actually own a quarter of the world's fresh water here in the United States. I've been thinking about that a lot, especially our own responsibility to keep it clean and things like that. But other thoughts up here. Yeah.
I'm sorry, oops, me again. You mentioned water, and I'm thinking that California and some other states in the Southwest are really interested in the Great Lakes. And the people around the Great Lakes say, no, that's not going to happen. And so if we can't even share within the country, I don't have great hopes about sharing with other countries.
Any other thoughts before we kind of conclude our final Great Decisions lecture? Well, I want to thank everybody. I feel like the last 6 weeks have been really great. I've seen a lot of familiar faces at a lot of these. So thank you for coming out and participating in this. Did you have any final things to mention about evaluations or?
Yes.